On September 12th, another Muslim man, Dr. al-Badr al-Hazmi from San Antonio, was also arrested at his home by authorities who claimed he knew Osmoth and Khan, or were ready to seek refuge with him. FBI agents searched his house for 6 hours and removed his home computer, medical textbooks, and Islamic magazines, while al-Hazmi called Saudi Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company that had sponsored his residency since 1997, and asked them what to do.
Law enforcement officials say a total of 4 people are under arrest as material witnesses in last week's terrorist attacks. Among them, 34-year-old Dr. al-Badr al-Zami, a Saudi national arrested at a Texas hospital Friday. A computer and boxes of paper were removed from his home by FBI agents. Attorney General John Ashcroft says all of those being held on immigration charges are being subject to brand new laws about how long they can be detained.
Another part of the investigation leads to a doctor who has worked for years at a hospital in San Antonio, Texas. CBS's Bob McNamara is following the trail there.
Federal sources tell CBS News that 43-year-old Saudi national Dr. al-Badr al-Hazmi's credit card may have been used by the terrorists to purchase tickets for flights they would later crash. The day after the terrorist attack, al-Hazmi's San Antonio house was raided by federal agents, and a computer was among other things seized.
They were just carrying things out, like boxes full of things, and I just noticed that they were carrying stuff out and that I didn't see the people that lived there. So I thought that was, strange.
Another computer and records were also seized at the University of Texas Health Science Center, where al-Hazmi was a resident radiologist who didn't show up for work the day the terrorists struck, and that was unusual.
We did not suspect that this individual had done anything wrong. We're waiting to see if he has. Obviously, we're very concerned.
At home, neighbors say al-Hazmi and his wife and 2 children kept mostly to themselves.
Everyone would always say hi, but they would never really say hi back.
At the San Antonio mosque that al-Hazmi attended for several years, he was known to be devout but not fanatical, and was never heard talking politics.
I do not recall him ever mentioning anything about Osama bin Laden. I do not.
Before being arrested, al-Hazmi had booked a flight last week from San Antonio to San Diego with 4 others on the FBI's so-called watch list. It is unclear whether 2 of the others were Jawed Osmoth and Ayub Ali Khan, who were arrested en route to San Antonio with box cutters and $20,000 in cash. Tonight, the people here who thought they knew al-Hazmi, where he lived, where he worked, and where he worshipped, are stunned. For if he was a radical inclined to terrorism, they never had a clue.
In 1999, al-Hazmi had twice contacted Abdullah bin Laden, one of the family members of Osama bin Laden, in reference to his nonprofit World Assembly of Muslim Youth, which teaches people about Islam, according to what investigative reporter Craig Palast revealed shortly after the 9/11 attacks, that the address of World Assembly of Muslim Youth, which was in Virginia, was just a couple of blocks down the road where 4 of the hijackers that attacked New York and the Pentagon are listed as having lived. Dr. al-Badr's travels to Washington and Boston earlier in 2001 was questioned too. Investigators said they were examining whether al-Hazmi might have been a victim of identity theft after he was released 2 weeks after. According to the book Criminal Investigation by Stephen G. Brandel, it states, it was discovered that 2 of the hijackers used credit cards that belonged to Dr. al-Badr al-Hazmi, a radiologist who lived in Texas, for various purchases. It was reported that al-Hazmi was not seen at work on Tuesday morning 9/11. According to Seattle PI, innocent Muslim doctor tells of arrest 2-week ordeal. On September 30th, 2001, he was released, but ironically denied knowing Khan and Osmoth, but went to the same Arizona flight school as hijacker of Flight 77 that struck the Pentagon, Hani Hanjour. And if things couldn't be any more suspicious, this man, Salim Ibrahim al-Hazmi, a 26-year-old working at a petrochemical plant in Saudi Arabia, was reported as a living hijacker, instead being the Flight 77 hijacker Salim al-Hazmi, who was 21. Salim Ibrahim al-Hazmi, whose name matched with the list of suspects, had not visited the United States and claimed his passport had been stolen by a pickpocket 3 years prior. But on September 19, Saudi newspaper Al-Sharq Al-Awsat published Salim Ibrahim al-Hazmi's photo alongside Badr al-Hazmi, who they claimed was the actual hijacker who had stolen his identity, when in actuality, Badr was alive, who had already been detained by authorities under suspicion of already being linked to cells. Not too accurate to say the least. On September 19th, Dr. Al-Hazmi, in his 8th day of detention, was finally allowed to meet with his attorney, Jerry Goldstein, the attorney hired by Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company sponsoring his medical studies here. But it wasn't until September 23rd that Badr Al-Hazmi got an opportunity to clear his name. He was accompanied by another attorney who had been hired for him by the Saudi Arabian embassy and had also met with the FBI. Within 24 hours after answering their questions, the FBI cleared Dr. Al-Hazmi and released him on Monday. The next morning, the doctor boarded a flight to San Antonio after almost 2 weeks in custody and went home. When he arrived in San Antonio on Tuesday, September 23rd, Dr. Al-Hazmi had no idea about the media attention that had been focused on him since his detainment. He moved his wife and 3 young children back to Saudi Arabia a few months after his release, then tried to return to San Antonio but was turned away because a student visa had been canceled during his detention. He had to go back to Saudi Arabia and wait while a new visa was issued with the help of Secretary of State Colin Powell. He left Texas for good in late June 2002 after completing his residency and now works as a radiologist in a hospital for employees of the Saudi National Oil Company and their families. And just for the sake of playing devil's advocate, Dr. Al-Hazmi could have very well been innocent, but there being another potential bin Laden family connections is also very telling, or at least worth considering that perhaps like our material witness pilot suspect from JFK Airport, also with a link to a bin Laden relative may very well been intentional or part of the modus operandi in already trying to frame the bin Laden family, therefore by default already implicating Osama bin Laden himself more thoroughly. But initially, with Dr. Al-Hazmi's arrest on September 14th, FBI agents drove him to San Antonio Airport, where he boarded a small aircraft with Khan and Osmoth, accompanied by a U.S. Marshal and an immigration officer that had also picked up Zacharias Moussaoui in Minnesota on the way to New York.
So we do have good news. One man has been arrested. He's considered a material witness, which...
This is one of the guys who was arrested, and they said not
right.
important at first.
Arrested Thursday night at JFK. Plus, they have detained 2 guys who kind of hopscotched across the country, wound up down in Texas. According to the Dallas Morning News this morning, they were then whisked to New York City. They're still here in New York City. Also, a 4th man, according to the Dallas News, a resident of San Antonio, has been brought to New York City. So that brings 4, the number detained, as they have just put out a watch list with 100 names of people they want to talk to.
And though Osmoth and Khan were also cleared of involvement in the attacks, prosecutors still charged them with unrelated case of fraud involving several hundred thousands of dollars of unpaid credit card charges. The men made a plea bargain, as arguing for their innocence would have left them in jail much longer than confessing their guilt. They had agreed afterward to be deported for immigration violations in February of 2003, after both men spent 16 months in prison, with the first 12 months of detention in solitary confinement. Dan Egan and Bob Woodward were awarded the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting for their September 29 article in the Washington Post about the detention of Khan and Osmoth, and which mentions an anonymous source said that both men had flight training, a major detail which was mostly held from the mainstream press, that basically they were trained as pilots. After returning to India, both Osmoth and Khan faced new problems. Authorities there detained and questioned both of them. The Hyderabad authorities criminally charged Khan and Osmoth with passport fraud, and as of June 2005, were still routinely interviewed and homes were inspected. A book had been released in 2001 called Detained Without Cause: Muslim Stories of Detention and Deportation in America After 9/11 by Irum Sheikh, presents narratives of known Muslim or Arab profiles detained on links to terrorism charges. The first chapter covers Osmoth. Throughout the entire chapter on Osmoth, nothing is detailed about what he and Khan were charged for in their credit card scams, as well as no mention whatsoever about their roommate, Muhammad Pervez. He essentially changed his story for the book, claiming that they were attempting to move to Texas to start new lives. In fact, the book primarily documents unfair conditions Osmoth felt he was being treated at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, and how the FBI also tried to plea bargain with him to admit to being a part of the 9/11 attacks, which sounds as if they wanted to make him a material witness against whoever could confess to who orchestrated it or neutralize him and flip him over as an asset. In the book, he also made accusations that the feds fabricated evidence. He also said he had no idea who the blind Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman or anything about the 93 bombing conspirators, nor about their mosque that was in the same neighborhood, even though Osmoth said he attended a different mosque and first moved in the U.S. in 1991. But in regards to his terrorism research, yet he had this to say: I don't think that Muslims even carried out the attacks because Islam does not allow the killing of innocent people. There is a possibility that some Americans did it. When the Oklahoma bombing happened, they arrested many Muslims in that area. Later they found out that Timothy McVeigh did it. I believe that someone else did the attacks and the U.S. government is using Muslims for political purposes. Osmoth later appeared in a video 3 years later after the book to do a sit-down interview with Indian news website twocircles.net, where the questions were mostly asked in English and Osmoth only responded in Arabic, even seeming to struggle with some answers, never looking at the camera. Alleging ill treatment also drew instant controversial media attention of whether torture should be practiced and effective for the United States. On October 21, 2001, Washington Post article hinting at the U.S. government's use, rendition, and torture, silence of 4 terror probe suspects poses dilemma for FBI. It refers to 4 suspects, which seems to be 4 essential material witnesses, and out of the hundreds arrested in the U.S., that material witnesses Zacharias Moussaoui, Nabil al-Marab, Ayub Ali Khan, and Mohammed Osmoth may actually have links to al-Qaeda. According to the detention of Ayub Ali Khan and Mohammed Jawed Osmoth Wikipedia page under detention, investigators said they offered Osmoth, Khan, Zacharias Moussaoui, and Nabil Marab the prospect of reduced sentences, money, jobs, and new identities within the U.S. if they assisted investigation into the attacks, while threatening to inject them with a truth serum, identified as sodium pentothal, or to transfer them to countries with more brutal interrogation techniques. But so far where we've left off, it's only been on the evening of September 16th, and Nabil al-Marab isn't apprehended until September 18th. But let's move on to the morning of September 17th in continuing to follow our 4 material witnesses that we have so far in hopes of uncovering what happened to our Saudi suspect pilot from JFK Airport and Flight 23.